Well, of course, I'm always looking for materials, but the problem is I live on the fringe of part of New York City, which is now called Soho, which was the south of Houston district. And that was an area when I arrived in New York in 1957, consisted almost entirely of abandoned lofts, manufacturing buildings. And they were abandoned because they could not possibly meet the health and the safety regulations. And so it was illegal to occupy them. And so artists had moved into this area and were illegally living there. Literally, they had disappearing beds and things of that sort, so that when the fire marshals came to inspect, they could disappear. And artists lived in a very kind of furtive, almost rodent-like relationship to the life of New York. The materials that you used were the materials that you found. So about the time that Frank Stella started painting the black stripe paintings, I started carving larger timbers in his studio.
Well, I don't really make sculpture, but I mean, I think my painting was always fairly physical. You know, there was something about stripe painting which was kind of repetitive, but sort of workmanlike. You just kept sort of doing it until you got tired.
When I had finished the work called Last Ladder, which is now in the collection of the Tate Gallery in London, which is a carved work very much inspired by Brancusi, Last Ladder is carved only on one face, so there are 3 faces which are not carved. So Frank, running his hand up and down the blank surface opposite to the carved face that I had worked on, and he said, "That's sculpture 2." And I take that as the moment in time in which I had my illumination about the fact that the uncarved block was sculpture 2.
No. Taking whatever it was, usually a piece of wood or a unit, and cutting it up. So I remember it as the saw cuts. And he did a lot of pieces where he cut things out. The pieces that I like best, and I think even the plastic pieces too, I mean, there was no question that the force behind them or the idea behind them or whatever it was Brancusi. That kind of thing, and the sort of idea of being able to make Brancusi in a kind of mechanical way or in a very straightforward way seemed kind of nice. I mean, it was a little different from carving and modeling. There was something about it. I mean, I love the idea of the, I still like the idea, actually, of using the saw cuts to do the work. And there was something about the machine cutting, which is good. The pieces, a lot of 2x4 pieces, which he notched and fit together and sort of made pyramids. I like those pieces, too, a lot. And that seemed to be the first thing that Carl did, which you could tell people about and say, look, this is supposed to be art. I remember how hysterical Ilyana was when I took her down there to see those, and she thought it was the worst thing that she'd ever seen.
Why should I have to cut into a timber to use a timber for sculpture? Or why must I have to mark a metal plate in order to use it? I'm not saying that this is the way art should be done at all. I'm not saying people should not carve in timbers, but I'm saying that it's much better for me to put 2 timbers in a relationship to each other and a relationship to the space that they're in than to cut into 1, 2, 3, or 100 timbers. To me, that seems so clear. To me, that seems so direct and so simple and so inoffensive. I still don't understand why people get disturbed about it, but they do.
In 1967, I was on a business trip to the States, and I knew Carl had an exhibition in New York, so we arranged to meet there. And I remember going into this huge, white, brilliantly lit, and apparently empty space. But Carl was there, and so we greeted each other and chatted, as we always did. So after a bit, I said, "Okay, Carl, where's the work? I'm dying to see it." And he said, "Uncle, sir, you are standing on it." And I looked down, and I was. And he threw back his head and laughed with sheer delight.
I remember when my father first saw a show of mine, which was about the same time in a similar show, and there was a zinc piece, I think 144 zinc, 144 copper, and I think maybe 144 magnesium. That piece, I believe, is in the Tate Gallery. And my father looked at the zinc piece with total amazement, and he said, "That's more zinc than I've ever seen before in my life." And it was from my father that I learned this great love of materials, because in his workshop he would have bins of scrap steel and iron and bins of copper and bronze and brass, and he loved materials. My father never accepted my work as sculpture. He really never did. But he accepted it as material and loved the works as material. And he also said another thing when he saw these works on the floor. He said, Carl, I don't know anything about art, but I know you'll make a hell of a lot more money if you put these things on the wall. And of course, he understood very much what expectations in the art world were like.